Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
And listeners, we come to you on our 100th episode.
Amazing. Crazy.
Unbelievable. And that ultimately is what I want to throw out there today is how do you know when it's time to end something?
Of course, I have to bring up Ted Lasso in the 100th episode, right?
And then he picks himself up and he goes, well, not really, because I learned something and that made me better.
Okay, so it's a failure. Like it's an event, not an identity. Amen, so be it.
I think too often I feel like there needs to be a justification for a thought or a feeling.
I think this is the choice that aligns, but if it's not, God's got me and I'll be on the right path.
This was the brightest light that truly saved me.
Zachary and I mean that. We want you to fare well because you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are, period.
Period.
Mwah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio.
And listeners, we come to you on our 100th episode.
Amazing. Crazy.
Unbelievable. 100 episodes. And you know, Elizabeth, in many elementary schools across the country, we are around the time when they hit the 100th day of school.
Mm-hmm.
And there's often fun celebrations that happen, like draw a picture of what you think you'll look like if you're 100 or, just various different activities. And so the 100th ends up being some kind of arbitrary but fun mark of celebration because, you know, it's a fun number and mathematically it's got all these advantages to work out, but it does feel like an achievement. And it is certainly for us that we have over the course of 2 years and change, put out, I think, just a tremendous amount of really great content that I know I have benefited from. I know you have. And then in speaking with people directly, in addition to the comments and messages that we've received, there's been a lot of people that have benefited from it. So just in terms of taking a cue from a first grader, celebrating our 100th episode, I think there's a lot there to applaud.
I love that.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
Yeah.
So many fun activities and memories associated with the 100th day. And it is also, I think, a good time to mention that this is our last episode that Simply Enough, we feel has hit a point where we feel it's a good time to wrap it up. And that really ultimately is what I want to throw out there today is how do you know when it's time to end something? And I know that's such a big question because it can go in so many different ways. And sometimes maybe you do know, or sometimes you don't know, or you just have to, make the guess. But the idea of when to walk off the field or when to retire or when to say that something is over. And that can be hard. It can be, ending a project that you love, like Simply Enough. It could be the end of a relationship. It could be the end of a career. It could be, but the idea that I think we often wrestle with this question how do you know when something is over, or how do you know when it's done? And it's a big question. I don't know the answer, but I can share what we talked about in deciding where Simply Enough has come and what our thought process was. So listeners, we were about, episode 94, 95 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And having some really good, straightforward, direct, honest conversations about where we felt in terms of the content that we had covered, also our listenership, and just overall feelings about Simply Enough. And I do have to give such credit to you, Elizabeth. You are always such an open partner that asks the questions like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And whatever answer is okay. Why I want to acknowledge that is because I think sometimes for myself, part of the question of, is it is it time or is it over, is that I don't always give myself permission to acknowledge the thoughts or feelings that I have about something if that means it's tied to ending, because I associate the completion of something often in some ways as, oh, did I do enough? Or is there failure associated with that kind of thinking? And you already just saying whatever thoughts are, whatever your feelings are okay. Let's put them out there. Was already the permission that I could have given to myself, but I wasn't, that you did. And then if I can share a little inside conversation about you for a second, if that's okay, is that we
Oh
were
God.
discussing, do we do episode 97 and stop at 97? Do we do episode 98? Like where do we end it?
Mm-hmm.
And you so honestly said, perhaps down the road, I may feel a certain way about not getting to 100. That to me, right? And I'll let you talk about it a little bit more if you want to explain a little bit more. I don't want to speak for you, but it was also an acknowledgement and actually living out that whatever feelings are okay, you recognize that for yourself, there was something associated with hitting that milestone. So I don't want to just put you on the spot, but I do invite you to share, I think, as a way of helping people think about what your process is and our process is when we wrestled with this question of like, is it time? Is it the end? What, etc. So I kick it to you.
Oh,
Just
okay.
if you want to share in that regard.
Um,
Because you're
okay,
so
hold on. So
good. You're so
I wasn't
good
expecting
at
that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
sorry.
thought you were gonna share like I just thought the natural segue was the thoughts that you gave yourself permission to think. So I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I just wasn't ready.
Let me do
Sorry.
that then. Let me do that
Okay.
then. So before I put you on the spot, let me actually share a little bit about what I was thinking or feeling in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So first and foremost, I felt like we had hit a place where the question of continuing was a worthy one of actually looking at, because prior I was like, nope, we're going to keep going. We're on this train and I feel good about it. So even just admitting like, no, I think it's time to actually think about if we've hit a point where it's good and complete, was one that I hadn't considered before. The other thing is, admittedly, this has been such a project with a friend that I had concerns and fears that the relationship that we have outside of the podcast would change, and that I was afraid of that change, and that there were feelings associated with a potentially lack of trust or some inability to see beyond our relationship as purely the podcast. And I was struggling with that, I will admit. I was also, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, very much thinking that the end of it would associate with some kind of failure. Mm-hmm. That, you know, the decline in our listenership or viewership, or the change in the evolution of the podcast over the 2.5 years and the 100 episodes, and okay, now it's time to end it, would feel like somehow like it didn't succeed, quote unquote. Like it didn't become a book, and it didn't become a this, and it didn't become a that, all these, you know, these beautiful things, which it still could. But I was correlating or connecting all of those metrics with the podcast, and was, I think, making a decision from a place of not wanting to seem like it failed. Mm-hmm. So the potential change in a relationship, the associations of failure, and then also the general feeling that something had shifted, but potentially not wanting to acknowledge that shift and just keep going, were three big things that were going on for me when you asked that question.
You're so good as an educator, because I love that you like are able to outline. I love that. Thank you. That helps me.
It's for myself, really.
And that helped me in order to respond. Like, I'm like, oh, thank you. See, that's why I wanted you to go first. Okay. So I'm not dismissing it all. I'm just going to speak from where I come. Right. Yeah. So, number one, your concerns of, you know, the relationship I honor that that was your feeling. So I'm not
Mhm.
dismissing it, but all I can say is that wasn't a thought on my mind at all, because to me, it's just such a no brainer. And it's not that I take our family ship, because,
Yeah.
there's family you're born with and family that you make along the way. Give it
Yeah.
up for
Yeah.
Higgins and Ted Lasso. Of course, I
Yeah.
have to bring up Ted Lasso in the 100th episode, right? So you're family that I made along the way, right? So you're not just a friend. So to me, this will sound dismissive, but like for our relationship to be different just because we're ending this formal podcast, it's like a laughable idea to me. Sorry that I know that sounds
Yeah. Yeah.
dismissive, but it is because it is on my end so easy to dismiss that notion, because that's just unfathomable to me. The um, third one, I'll tell you why we're going to the second one. So the third one, where you said there's just this kind of shift in
Mhm.
um, the where the podcast sits in our
Mhm.
lives.
Mhm.
Very true, but necessarily so.
Mhm.
Life is a journey, life is an experience. So there are certain things, extenuating circumstances that have nothing to do at all with the podcast. But because of those extenuating circumstances that have nothing to do with the podcast, still they affect the time it takes for the podcast, the thought process, the bandwidth of our brains that we
Mhm.
can dedicate to a podcast compared to other things in our life. So of course there's a shift is kind of my
Yep.
response in, and it is what it is. Another phrase that I have learned to adopt instead of "it is what it is," which almost has kind of like a defeatist thought
Yeah.
to it,
Yeah.
is "amen, so be it." Because that way it just kind of lifts me up a little bit of like, God's plan, God's timing, all things work together for good. And so, amen, so be it.
Mhm.
There are extenuating circumstances, in our
Mhm.
outside lives. There's so much more to our life than the podcast. But because of those external things, it does affect and necessarily shifts what we can do and what we can dedicate to it. So, that's the third
Yeah.
on your outline. So the second one is the one that hits home, which is associating ending this with a failure.
Mhm.
And let me throw it out there already that there's still parts of me to right now sitting here when you
Yeah.
brought it up that, yeah, I do consider it, a failure in that we're not going
Yep.
on, or we didn't
Yep.
create a course out of this or a book, and Oprah didn't call us, and you know what I mean, and
Yes.
Jason Sudeikis didn't invite me up for Thundergong, or you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
he didn't love our Ted Lasso quotes. So I mean, all joking aside, so I'm going to acknowledge that there is that part of me, because I am type A plus, you know I'm working on it. I'm getting better at it, but there's still that very ingrained part of me of my 52 years of living, achievement based, outcome
Mhm.
based. So of course, in having to end it, there's going to be a part of me that's like, what? We didn't continue, and this didn't
Yeah.
happen, and this didn't come of it. Okay, failure. But the way that I lift myself from that is, okay, if that is the worst case scenario, that this is a failure in my eyes, in your eyes, in readers' eyes, or sorry, see reader, because
Yeah.
we didn't get a book. But fail. But if this is a failure, there's two things about that. If this is a failure, number one, is it all failure? So if worst case scenario, it is a failure, is it all failure? Is that the only thing that can be said about these 100 episodes in these past 2 years? No. So it's not all failure. It's
Mhm.
not, it's not the whole of this podcast. And then again, if worst case scenario, it is a failure, and I'll even make it the worst case scenario, which meaning it is the whole of it. That is the whole definition of simply enough. If I'm not going to, if I'm going to go against my nature and not look for the
Yep. Yep.
positives and not
Yep.
look for the benefits and not look for what to be grateful for and not look for the shifts in perspective and light and love and joy that it brought to me and to you and anybody else that it might have brought to, that's bonus because we started this for us anyway. But even if I'm going to go against my nature and totally ignore that and truly define what we're ending it, it's all a failure. And that's the big definition. Okay, then let's look at the word failure. What's the big deal? So that's kind of how I kind of sit with all three things that you mentioned in terms of, you know, the ending of
Mm-hmm.
this podcast. That
Mm-hmm.
if, in fact, the worst case scenario is it is a failure, and that's all it is a complete and utter whole total failure. Okay, amen, so be it.
Yeah.
What's the big deal? That's how I
So
process it.
I want to come back to the failure thing, the failure point that you made, because I have a story that connects with education to that. But before I forget, as I often do, I brought up the relationship component on purpose, obviously, because it's what I've been thinking and feeling. And also because I wonder how many other people, when approaching some kind of change, also feel similarly that a change in relationship is wrapped up into whatever their thoughts are about their decision. The fear of the unknown and the fear of a change of a relationship or something can, or at least in my own life, can impact the ways in which I see my own thoughts and feelings about a decision. And leaving Hawaii was a big one. It was very difficult to say goodbye to the immediate access that I had to people like you, that I loved, and a community that I loved, and knowing that those relationships were going to change just because we weren't going to be around each other, really became how I saw what was on the other side of the move. That Chicago became the destination where you weren't there, where my friends weren't there, where the school wasn't there, and I saw that change and in relationships as now the identity of what I was moving into. So I brought up the relationships specifically on purpose to invite anybody else to understand how I think often relationships and what can happen to a relationship through a change, through you at a graduation, when you, now you're people are going to go off and go on to other different places. They're not going to be in that same place anymore, or even a breakup, or the change in a friendship, et cetera, can be a component. And I just wanted to, in the way that you gave me permission to know that that's okay, I wanted to share that strategically so that people could also give themselves permission to say, I recognize I have thoughts and feelings about this person that I love, that maybe our situation may be different, and that is a factor in how I'm seeing a potential change or transition. So I just wanted to put that out there. So my story for you is this: ceramics class, first grader. For any of you that have ever done any kind of pottery, that the minute that pottery goes into the kiln, you don't really know what's going to happen. There could be an air bubble right? You don't really know. Mm-hmm. There could be an air bubble. There could be something that happens that causes it to explode as it comes to the really high heat. And this is a lesson that many young or many new people to ceramics don't always know about. And so there can be a surprise when a piece that they've worked on for hours and hours and hours can come out of the kiln and just be broken. And then that whole process of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that could have happened, et cetera. So first grader, God, I love this little first grader, worked on this piece, sculpting piece that he was so excited to give his mom. And it went into the kiln. He glazed it. He did all the things. And there was a pocket of air. That air exploded the piece, and he brought it out. Okay. He was inconsolable, crying, so upset. His teacher was like, I can't, I need somebody to help me with this because I have other students that I have to attend to, et cetera. So, Zachary, can you help out? Yes, I can. Okay. So out of the minds of youth, it's really, for anybody that has kids or worked with kids, they just say things that just like kind of rock you to your core. So he's crying, he's crying, he's crying. I won't be able to give this to my mom, blah, blah, blah. And then he just kind of stopped and he goes, I failed. I failed. And I'm like wanting to protect him because I see this little mind and I see little Zachary that like so much like what you said associated like not getting or the desired effect that you want means you automatically failed and everything it becomes all encompassing like you can't see anything else in that it just if I didn't get this then that automatically means failure and he stops and he's like and he says I failed every and his shoulders slump down and he kind of just looks so defeated and then he picks himself up and he goes well not really because I learned something and that made me better and that was it and then he literally coached himself in that moment of understanding to your point the worst case scenario he doesn't have a piece he can't give his mom whatever the worst case scenario there was still something that changed him that helped him grow and in and of that self he now associated failure with learning and so in his mind failure wasn't a bad thing failure was a moment of growth it didn't do what he wanted it didn't he had hoped and dreamed and planned and worked but now he at 6 years old 7 years old saw failure no longer as less than, but failure actually as a moment of self and actually a growth of self.
Right.
First grader, right. Boom.
That's Carol Dweck, right? With her growth mindset. And again, the failure, couple things. Failure is an event. He's not a failure.
Yep.
Fine. That might have been an event where, the ceramic work failed. Fine. So it's an event, not an identity. And then secondly, okay, so it's a failure. Like the weight that we put on it, they learn to be afraid of failure. They learn to avoid failure, right? That's learned because of what we put on it. So just like, again, we've talked about in previous episodes, a kid is learning, a little toddler is learning to walk, they fall, they look, and before they cry, they actually look for our reaction. And if we are, oh my God, they fell, and we react with fear, they learn that. If we rush in, they learn that they're going to always need help to get up. Or if they're applauded, cheered, like find joy in it, then there is no stigma of the fall. There is no stigma of failure. I will say that this is one thing that is integral in science and scientific experiments. There's really no such thing as a perfect experiment with perfect data and perfect outcome. And the better studies with the better outcomes are always based on prior experiments that showed less than perfect results. And from those previous experiments, the tweaks of the materials and the methods is what creates a quote better experiment with a quote better outcome. So failure is almost inherent in science. And is looked upon in terms of, well, that's how progress is made. So that's why it's not the two ends of the spectrum, failure and perfection. It's just progress. That's the key. I also wanted to answer your question. Sorry if it's like a total pivot all of a sudden, but I just wanted to answer your question when you asked me like what were my thoughts and feelings, and I did talk about the three things you mentioned in terms of relationship, failure, and these feelings of ending, and that the importance of Simply Enough had to go of our podcast had to go down in our priority list necessarily. So then that brings me to the other question you had, which is, What was my thought process in terms of when we were at episode 96 and we very easily, and we're contemplating, okay, well, why don't we just at the end of this recording of episode 96, we say, bye-bye, that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I, pushed for and requested, can we go to 100? I can honestly say that I have no idea what I was thinking. It wasn't based on thought. It wasn't really too much based on cognition and reason and rationale. But I'll also tell you that that's where some of my best, for lack of a better word, certainly most blessed choices come from, which is they're actually not choices as if I've reasoned and rationalized them out cognitively. I honor what my heart feels as much, if not more so, than my head. So to be perfectly honest, if you remember that conversation, I vacillated back and forth. Let's end it now. No, 100. Let's end it now. Then 100. Okay. So the way that I came to 100 is because I just went with that feeling where I couldn't articulate why. And I didn't feel the need to articulate the reason cognitively why. I just know myself enough, myself in terms of my heart and my feelings, that, ooh, it just would feel better to end at 100. And I can't tell you why, but it just feels better. And that's how I came to it. I come from a place of where do I find the most peace? Where do I feel the least angst, even if I cannot rationalize it? So while we were having the conversation, there was just some little thing just kind of niggling in me, like, really, we're going to end it on 96 or 97 or 98? I mean, can't we just like end it nicely? And it just felt right. And I trusted that intuition. I trusted that feeling that when I said out loud, I don't know why, but I would just like to end it at 100 because I just think that I will feel better knowing that we did it 100. And a couple of years from now, looking back, that we ended at 100 and that we can say that it's 100, other people, who cares? Who's listening to us right now? Who knows, right? So the 100 isn't so much for other people, like we talked about, but it's more like, I don't know, I can't explain it, but I just feel that 100 feels better to me. So I want to honor that. On a bigger scale, that's why I chose orthopedic surgery as my specialty. I giggle when I use the word choose, and I'm often asked that, what made you choose orthopedic surgery? I swear it was not a choice. It was just a feeling. It was just, I feel good when I'm on the orthopedic surgery rotation as a med student. I enjoy it most when I'm on orthopedic surgery rotation. I'm in the flow state when I'm in orthopedic surgery. So it was all a feeling. And when people ask me, they want this cognitive, rationale, reasoned out argument to defend why I chose. Oh, because I like the physiology and I like the musculoskeletal. No, actually, I just really had fun. I liked using the power tools in the operating room. I liked the patients. I enjoyed their outcome. It made me feel good. Like, that's honestly my answer. So in terms of choices and decisions, like I said, some of the most blessed, and I use that word purposely, some of the most blessed are not because they're actual choices or decisions that I reasoned and thought out. I went with my gut. I went with my that centered chakra. And I just felt I allowed being aligned. And I know I'm aligned with the divine, with the universe. I say God, that's the word I use, but listeners and viewers, you use your word. You cannot get wet by the word water. So you use the word that you use for universe, source, force, Allah, Buddha, God, Jesus. But I just know that my most blessed choices and decisions weren't choices and decisions at all. And they were blessed because I felt peace in my heart and I honored that peace. And in that state of peace, that's how I knew that it was an aligned quote choice or decision, but it wasn't a choice or decision because I wasn't making it. I was pulled or I was called to articulate that choice or that decision.
Mm-hmm. So, forgive me, I'm going to go a little bit on a bent here, okay? Because we have benefited listeners from listening to you, and I know this has happened for when I've shared too, but we have benefited so often by getting insights into the way that you process, and the way that you process can help us see the model and try it on for ourselves. So one of the reasons why I totally put you on the spot, and thank you for letting me do that, and thank you for coming back to it, because I was like, should I bring it back? I'm so glad, because there are things that you talked about that you were doing and thinking and feeling in that moment that were such highlights for me, and important in our conversation about if we're ever wrestling with a question about, is it time? So many things about what you said, and you wrapped it up beautifully. The word that I think I just want to highlight for a second is the word vacillate. Very, very fair. I didn't really know my thoughts, even my feelings, and I was in that place of vacillation as well. I said to you at one point, and I felt very clear about something. I was like, nope, I think that this needs to happen. And you were like, whoa, that was clear. I don't know where it came from in terms of cognition, but I knew that it came from a very clear place somewhere inside of me. Okay. And I was in that place because, and that was a new place for me. That really was, because of 2.5 years of learning and being a part of these conversations and growing in Simply Enough to trust that that moment could come up. And if it did come up, I would be at peace with it. And then I know you would. And even if you weren't, it didn't really matter, because that was what was clear and needed for me. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the little bent that I'm going to go on here for a second is, if you look at our last few episodes, just the titles, okay? Enjoyment comes from sharing. Be still, we're not human doings. You do you. Give yourself a round of applause. Luck is on your side. Who's the hole now? You may feel lonely, but you are never alone. Sorry, but stop apologizing for who you are. When you talked about your thought process of how you came to, 100 feels like a good place, you literally hit every topic that we and I'm not trying to put a bow on this. Like, I'm actually just trying to call out how everything that you talked about in your thinking is demonstrated in that one moment with all of the episodes that we have led to in this, right? Literally the piece of saying, this is what I think should happen, is you doing you. It's also, you're not alone, because you said you are in alignment with God. You are in alignment with universe. So in that piece, you are really not alone. You are loved, you are supported, and you are together with God. So there is no other reason other than, this is what I feel. And I think too often, and I'm going to say this for myself, I think too often I feel like there needs to be a justification for a thought or a feeling. I don't want to do that because, and there doesn't really have to be. And you just demonstrated that, because that there already is a because there, which is, this is who I am. I'm going to do me, and I'm going to do me because I'm in alignment with the universe. I'm with God, right? And even if that quote unquote makes me the a-hole, even if it does, that's still me being me, and I can quote unquote applaud that, and I don't need to apologize for it. So it is my tendency, as you know, to try to put a little button or a culmination or something on it. And I'm not really trying to do that. I'm just trying to acknowledge that in that model, Elizabeth, and what I was suspecting would be the case, is that you would actually demonstrate the ways that everything that we've talked about just in the last few episodes actually come together and seam and stitch together. So that was my little bent, my little tear.
Well, that was a perfect button to not only end this episode, but have an ending for our podcast. But the thoughts and the values and the perspectives, this is not like, a degree bestowed on you, these life lessons that we've
Right.
mulled over these 100 episodes. It's something that, we keep coming back to. We learn, we relearn, we unlearn. And that's why to end it is okay. We started off in episode 1 talking a lot about, and that's okay, because we almost often feel that we have to justify ourselves, and that's okay. Well, same thing here with this, our 100th episode. We're ending simply enough. We feel very aligned in going with that. I'm going to add one more little thing as to why I have peace with this and many other choices and decisions. And this might not resonate with everybody, but I think anybody with faith, and this is not to alienate those that don't have some sort of spiritual practice, but I can just only speak for myself. The reason why I tend to go with the semantics of choice as opposed to decision is because I just never, I shouldn't say never, I never say never and never say always. But my faith is so strong that, like I quoted, all things work together for good. Another scripture, for he knows the plans that he has for me, for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us. So I just feel like things are choices and not an end all be all. So amen, so be it. If what we are choosing is truly aligned for now or always, then amen, so be it. And if not, it's not over. We will be in some way, shape, or form aligned and called to do something else. And I'm not just talking about the podcast episode. Like literally, that's why I try not to put so much weight and drama in decisions as if that's it and that's always going to be. The only way something is it and that's always how it's going to be is if, not to be morbid, you die the very next moment. Otherwise, life is a journey. So who knows what circuitous route the good Lord above takes us, possibly based on our choices. It might have been a more direct route if we were in tune and aligned, but I don't know. I just don't feel like there's so much weight on decisions because I will go with this choice. I think this is the choice that aligns, but if it's not, then it's a more circuitous route, but God's got me and I'll be on the right path. More circuitous, but it's still the path with him because I am not alone.
Yeah. Well, I want to offer a thank you to our listeners.
And viewers.
Yes. As Elizabeth said, we got into this really for ourselves. Along the way, I think we took a turn and realized that, well, we can't just do it for ourselves. Like we do have an audience, right? And I have truly been in awe of the people that have written to me that have listened and have had follow-up thoughts and questions or ways in which they felt that our episodes helped them or even challenged them or were provocative. And just to know that we have participated in connecting with others, that just the opportunity to connect with another individual as a result of the podcast, to me already means that the gifts that have come out of this can never put this in the quote unquote place of a failure. And beyond all of that, beyond all the external opportunities, the opportunity to do and build and create something with a loved one, with a family member, has just been beyond wonderful. And I want to put this on the episode because it means that much to me. Leaving Hawaii, as I've talked about often, still remains one of the hardest things that I've ever gone through. There were some very dark periods during that time. This was the brightest light that truly saved me during this time. So listeners, you were a part of that. Viewers, you were a part of that. But Elizabeth, you were it. And this podcast has been that. So I would be remiss if I just didn't acknowledge that often, sometimes, quote unquote, an end becomes about the finish as opposed to the opportunity, and also what happened in it. Even in deciding that we were going to go to the 100th episode, you said, okay, well, we have what, 4 episodes left or 5 episodes. So, like, whatever you want to talk about, whatever I want to talk about, even in that moment, your superpower of seeing of the potential and the joy, you were like, there's still time, there's still opportunity, there's still a moment. And that has always been the way in which you have approached our relationship and our friendship, and helped me get through truly one of the darkest times. So, not to end on a totally like cryy moment, but it's really just coming from a place of a heart so full of love and gratitude.
Thank you so much, not only for all of the hard work that you did, because you really truly edit and publish all of these 100 episodes plus, because of the republishing of some of our prior episodes. So thank you for that concrete work. But even on top of that, thank you for the indescribable, immeasurable joy that you brought and shared, because enjoyment is for sharing. It was beyond honor. It was beyond privilege. It was truly a blessing. So you are a light, and I love you. And to you, to reassure you of your outline bullet point number 1 in terms of our relationship.
Yes.
And also to our listeners and to our viewers, this isn't goodbye. This is farewell. And truly, Zachary and I mean that. We want you to fare well, be well, because you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are. Period.
Period.
Mwah. Aloha, farewell.